Welcome to Mylan Advisors. I'm Jess Larson. This is our Innovation and Leadership Show. Today we've got part 2 of our interview with Jonathan Cutrell. He's the Director of Technology for Whiteboard. He's a podcaster. His show Developer Tea, which is TEA. His show Developer Tea has like 385 episodes, 6 million listens. He's a pilot. He's a musician.
I would say the most useful and successful websites today are those that are willing to iterate quickly. This is a huge value that we have at Whiteboard. Iterating quickly, responding to the market immediately, right? And this is, hear me very clearly, I don't mean changing your brand from one thing to an entirely different thing the next day. I mean expressing your brand in a fluid and dynamic way. Don't view websites as a delivered product, but rather as a organic platform.
This is another episode of our Innovation and Leadership series where we interview pro athletes, world-class musicians, CEOs, Hollywood filmmakers, and a wide variety of other high achievers. Before we get rolling, I want to invite you to get involved with Child Rescue, the charity our founders started. To learn more about them, just come to our website, icollective.co, and check on the Child Rescue tab on our menu. Also, I want to talk to you about one of our show's sponsors. I met these guys back on episode 6. CEO Zach Smith was telling me all about starting a skateboard company and how much he hated doing the bookkeeping for a skateboard shop, and how he really got led to start this business, Bookly, that's a hybrid combining bookkeeping software and human services. And I'll tell you why I let him become a sponsor. It's because I use their service now. I don't love paying $50 an hour for bookkeepers to do stuff that I know software could do way, way cheaper. But I don't love bookkeeping at all. So I want a real live human who knows what they're talking about to help me with the stuff I don't understand. Probably the straw that broke the camel's back for me, though, the thing that put me over the top was that they could do my taxes and payroll also. So totally suggest checking them out. Go to their website, bookly.co, and check out their flat rates. I've been super happy with them. So now on to today's episode. Jonathan, when we were finishing up the last episode, we were talking about the idea of becoming more self-aware as individuals. But I want to take it another direction, thinking about the web and technology, and it's so ubiquitous in all of our lives. And we all kind of, I think all of us running organizations or in business, we kind of watch some of the trends of what's happening or what's coming next, and how much should I be investing in marketing automation or these kind of things, right? But where you're spending, day in, day out, building these web apps, inventing new cool websites, can you talk about what you see as the future of that in the next kind of year or two?
Sure, absolutely. I think that a colleague of mine said it recently very well. He said, the moment that we realized how different a given product was. For example, the iPhone, when it released, everybody was like, "Wow, this is a new." It kind of took us by surprise, right? I hate to use the iPhone because it's such a overly used trope, but I think we're right on the cusp of experiencing the same thing, or the same feeling rather, but specifically dealing with artificial intelligence, or maybe more appropriately, assistive intelligence. So we've seen this with things like Amazon Echo. We've seen it with things like Siri, of course, but it's going to become more and more involved in our lives. And this is going to extend to your digital products. And a lot of the things that we're used to, like, for example, web design will become assisted. It already is now, but even more, it will become assisted by AI. What that means for you as a designer, or what that means for you as a marketing director or a copywriter, is yet to be determined. But there may be things like, for example, suggestive copy, right? And I'm not talking about suggestive copy.
You mean
I mean suggestions
smart comment,
for your
smart
copy.
Content,
exactly.
Where it kind of knows who you are, and it's delivering stuff that's more relevant to you instead of just the same homepage to everybody. Is that?
It is very similar to that, yeah. So, and it could be that you have different ways of identifying what kinds of users there are that are using your site. And we've had this for a long time in really crude forms. For example, A/B testing and then automatically adapting websites, right? We hopefully most people have seen this. but it's basically you run a differential like copy. Let's say you have one piece of copy, and then another copywriter writes a second piece of copy for the same purpose, and then you run that on your site, and you effectively watch percentages and engagement, and you can run these tests, and eventually the winner takes over. It kind of evolves to be the best version, right? And these are things that are going to become more and more common and much more accessible.
So that's interesting. You hear about these stories like an Upworthy or sites like this that have just become such huge sites across the internet, and they're just religious A/B testing of, hey, which headline is going to get our emails opened, which headline is going to get people to click, right, and engage, and they just,
Yep.
I mean, they're like exhaustive on it, and yet look at the incredible results they've got. So is anybody, like, are there firms that are already offering what you're talking about, or is that something that you think is coming? Where
Well, these are things
the A/B
that are
testing is
tools.
already, like, the A/B testing where the human doesn't have to fix it later, the system migrates to what the higher one is. Is that exist now, or is that something you think people will build?
It does exist now. There's a tool. I think the most popular one is called Optimizely. Effectively, and then there's another one, I think, Visual Optimizer or something along those lines. These are like plugins that you can use with WordPress. These are very, very much so available. And if you think about it, it's not very complicated, right? You're effectively saying, okay, flip a coin. Okay, so heads or tails, and if you get heads, you get this piece of copy. If you get tails, you get this piece of copy. Now we're going to watch your behavior for the next couple of minutes. And if you click the buy button, then we're going to put a mark, like a tally, under the heads column, right? Or under the tails column, whichever one you were served. And then eventually we're going to say, okay, how many people have flipped the coin? And then, if it's over, let's say a certain threshold, 1,000 people that have flipped this coin, now we're going to start preferring whichever one has a reasonable margin over the other. Now, if we have something that's really close, maybe we don't prefer it yet, right? But Optimizely does exactly this. And I'm pretty sure that Visual Optimizer or something along those lines does the same thing. This is exactly how machine learning or some forms of machine learning actually works, by the way.
Yeah. So, like, example, Mylan Advisors, probably our two main disciplines that we're teaching is operational excellence, kind of like the lean Toyota production system, right? We're an affiliate of the people that invented the Shingo Prize, the Shingo Institute, right? And then the other one is design thinking, right? The innovation world specifically, we're big fans of, IDEO and MIT and IBM's thoughts on design thinking, right? So ideally we have one version of the website which is really heavy on operational excellence. We're seeing if that produces better results than one that's heavier on design thinking, right? And the system picks the winner based on how people are actually interacting with the website instead of just how me and my team have a gut feel about what people will like, right?
Exactly.
So I was going to talk to you just about design thinking, innovation, AI, and sensors. Like, one of the things that we're working with some groups on is, they look at staffing costs in a business, right? For some of them, it's 50-60% of all expense for the entire company. And yet their analytics on people are pretty low, right? They get a once a year annual review piece of paper. It's like a lot of anecdotal stuff versus like some of these new products out that are like, there's a little screen by the door as staff are leaving at the end of the day. They just click, was it a good day? Was it a bad day? And these organizations that have, thousands or hundreds of thousands of staff across multiple countries, their head business leaders have like a finger on the pulse of the whole business real time, right?
Sure.
Any thoughts about how like the sensors and the Internet of Things and, AI or machine learning will impact web design?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start with kind of a scenario that I think would be important to your previous example of the clicking the button as you walk out. Let's imagine that you have 100 people walking out that door, and you're number 100, and you've watched everybody go before you. Let's say a light turns green when they say yes, it was good, it was a good day, and 99 people clicked, it was a good day. Well, psychology and kind of rules of psychology, not just theory at this point, it's pretty much proven that you're going to be pretty compelled to also click that it was a good day, right? So humans are hard, is the point. Humans are very difficult to measure, to understand, because our minds are chaotic. And the variables that go into measuring what a human thinks, especially because we barely even know what we think, right? That's a compelling reality. That's a compelling truth. A book that I would recommend on this subject, Thinking Fast and Slow. If you haven't
Daniel
read it,
Kahneman?
it's a requirement, in my opinion, for just humans in general. But it really talks about understanding the fact that a lot of what you think is kind of out of your control. Some of it is under your control. Ultimately, it is all under your control to some extent because you are you. Your organics are controlled by you. But cognitively speaking, a lot of that stuff happens without you knowing it.
Understanding our
So
biases and that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's a
exactly, yeah.
great no, it's a great example with a flaw and something like that. If they're watching what their coworker did, right? Ahead of
Sure.
time, that could
Well,
be
and
major skewing of the
it
data.
also it also kind of calls into question, if that data, when is that data best collected, right? Should we collect it during the day? Because there's other in that same book, he talks about the fact that we tend to judge our experiences based off of the last thing that happened, and an average between the last thing that happened and the peak thing that happened, right? So, for example, one of the experiments they conducted was a cold hand experiment. It's basically people putting their hands into extremely cold ice, right, for a certain period of time. And he had one group that had it be extremely cold the whole time, and then another group where he slowly pumped warm water in, right? And the second group, they kept their hands in for 90 seconds longer than the first group. Now, if you were to, look at the sum of all of the pain that each of these groups experienced, certainly the first group would be less pain, or less pain overall, and the second group would be more pain overall. However, when they were surveyed, the second group said that they would prefer their experience more often than the first group, right? So it was, now that I'm thinking about it, it wasn't two groups, but it was two separate experiences for the same group. People said they would prefer redoing the second experience more than they would prefer redoing the first experience. It's a strange thing because our remembering brains and our experiencing brains are two different things. This is a really compelling concept. So again, measuring humans, extremely difficult to do, and still a good thing, to a good pursuit, but extremely difficult to do. So how that changes websites, really, it's a good question because we're talking about analytics, right? We're talking about quantifying behavioral science. So first, we need to understand behavioral science, and there's still a lot of work left to do in that.
Yeah. So, what else do you see for the future of web? From
The
either,
future of
yeah,
web.
from design standpoint, from a tech standpoint,
Hmm.
every one of us with an organization, whether we're nonprofit, for profit, government, we all have a website, right? Thinking about the
Absolutely.
psychology of websites that are the most useful, what are things that you think we should all be paying attention to or researching of the most useful, the most successful websites today?
I would say the most useful and successful websites today are those that are willing to iterate quickly. This is a huge value that we have at Whiteboard. Iterating quickly, responding to the market immediately, right? And this is, hear me very clearly. I don't mean changing your brand from one thing to an entirely different thing the next day. I mean expressing your brand in a fluid and dynamic way. Don't view websites as a delivered product, but rather as a organic platform. So what that means is, if something changes, don't get too tied up with don't attach yourself to a specific version or a specific design, so much so that you're unwilling to change. Change is such an important part of what the web is. If you think about the most visited websites, typically they're the ones that have a lot of change, right? Because we're attracted to the dynamic nature of these things.
You get the
So,
endorphin relief every
you know,
time you check CNN or Facebook from something,
right,
from the
exactly.
novelty.
Right, exactly. And because, we're used to the interface, and that, there's another lesson in there that making something approachable is maintaining a brand, maintaining familiarity while changing content. That's kind of the goal here. So being adaptable, being quick to change, being able to capture behavioral data so that you know how to change. Those are really the two big pieces that I see as important for general content marketing, right? But also for anybody who's looking to build a product. This doesn't just go for websites; it goes for every product you can imagine, right? Responding to the market, being able to respond to it. It just so happens that digital is cheap to change. Unfortunately, physical products are very expensive to change.
Yeah. So narrowing that down, advice for non-developers, non-designers, as we're leading organizations and we're thinking about a website that can be the most effective for us. How do we implement this being adaptive and iterating? What's an example of like a systematic way? Should we be reviewing? Have a team that has a review every month? What's some examples?
I think it's important to, one of the things we talk about is content delivery schedule. So if you aren't creating new content on a regular basis, then you're probably not going to see new engagement, right? Now, this is slightly different for, for example, like a landing page for a product or something like that. But assuming we're talking about marketing for an organization, a site that is marketing for an organization, if you aren't sharing new content, if you aren't creating new content, then it's difficult to continue changing, right? Because rewording the same things that you've already said has a limited value, right? So once somebody has seen something that you've created, re-engaging that same thing again is going to have extremely diminished returns, and even more so the third time. So constantly creating new content, that's incredibly important. So a very simple way is get stuff up on a blog. This is so simple. It's something you're going to hear every single time you listen to a podcast like this, right? It's not a secret. It's not a trick. It's simply content. I think the word blog is unfortunate because it has this kind of like stickiness to it that we don't like because it feels very hacky. And it's old and it's a little bit antiquated.
But you look at like a McKinsey who they rebrand it Insights, right? And all of a sudden it sounds all of a sudden it sounds hoity-toity and right, like, oh, I wonder what that is.
Exactly.
McKinsey has Insights, right?
It's a quarterly review or something like that. It's funny though,
right? If you just rebrand something, the Developers Journal, right? Developers Journal Quarterly. Exactly. All of a sudden it's like, exactly. Oh, that's a thing, huh?
Right. So, right. Yeah.
Tell me your opinion on this of a, I don't know, 99% of websites, the homepage is pretty much the same for the 9 months until they do until they have their yearly web redesign, right? Like everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But versus like a Red Bull that, the front page, the homepage is new content every time you're going to it. Or like a Seth Godin who, the first thing when you get there is whatever his latest post is.
He doesn't really have a homepage, right? Does he?
So talk to me about psychology there, in your opinion, of the Red Bull approach versus, most organizations' homepage.
I think the most underserved page is the homepage. And I don't mean served like from the server. I mean, it's a blind spot for so many organizations and development firms for that matter. A lot of people put a lot of weight on equally distributing our efforts across all of our pages. But if you put the amount of weight that is probably appropriate, right? If you're statistically looking at how many people are coming into your website via the homepage, a lot of times, unless you have some viral content, right? There's a few exceptions to this rule, but most of the time, in like 99% of the cases, most people are hitting your homepage. That is their introduction to your site, right? And if you're putting, 1/10 or 1/20th of your energy into that homepage because you have 19 other pages that you're building, you are underserving your homepage, period. So what I like to tell people is, follow the data, right? So that means follow the engagement numbers. How are people engaging with your homepage? and then create something on your homepage that is a call to action. Those are two very simple things. Follow the data and create a call to action on your homepage. You'd be surprised how many people make their homepage really more like an about page, right? So many times, and the reverse. The about page very often should be the homepage, but so many people, unfortunately, they create the wrong type of content for their homepage, and then when people visit it, they don't really know what to do next. It feels very dull. It feels antiquated a lot of the time. Another example of good homepage changes is actually Adult Swim's website. They change it every single day, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a while since I saw it, but the psychology aspect of this change, it really depends on what you are building. So I'm not going to give you a heuristic rule of thumb for that, because some companies don't need an ever-changing website, right? Obviously, Red Bull, they have, at least somebody thinks, and I assume that they're probably right, somebody thinks that changing their homepage regularly is a good thing. That may not be the perfect answer for everyone, but I can tell you that almost every single person who's listening to this, you would benefit from having some kind of call to action on your homepage.
Well, listen, we appreciate all the time you spent with us today, and just thinking about the move forward. You've done so much with cause marketing and different things like this. For child rescue, in just kind of a 1-minute thing, like thinking about all the web work you've done for causes that make a difference. Our listeners know about our charity, Child Rescue, that tries to prevent child sex trafficking. Thinking about, where we've got a pretty static homepage, says every child deserves a childhood, right? And it scrolls down, talks about opportunity to help out with the Cusco orphanage or something like that. Can you give me just one principle that when you start with a new cause-based group, hey, here's something to think about of the first words when somebody gets to your website? What are you helping them out with psychology-wise that we should think about at Child Rescue?
Selling is not a dirty word. This is the most poisonous concept in nonprofit organizations. Selling is not a dirty word. Selling is understanding the human mind, right? If we were to reconfigure all of our sales language to say psychology, or if we were to reconfigure it to say value delivery, then we would have no problem in this area, or at least significantly less. But we've imbued selling with this, the dirty car salesman, and that's not what selling is about. Selling is about creating a pitch, right, and moving people to action. Now, you can tell me that your site is intended to move people to action, right, and that it is creating a pitch. So you are selling, regardless of what it feels like. That's what you're doing. So we have to retrain our brains and understand that selling and branding, these are words that have a lot of, unfortunately, negative connotations from our culture. We have to reconfigure our brains and realize that the same psychological principles that apply to selling an iPhone apply to moving people to support orphanages, to support the underserved.
I love it.
Same
love
thing.
It. I think that's a great place to end. And appreciate all the time that you spent with us here today.
Absolutely, Jess. Thank you so much.
Bye. That was part 2 of our interview. If you missed part 1, please go back an episode and download the episode before this one for the first half of the interview. As always, please check icollective.co for show notes of things referenced during the interview and to learn more about our guest. And if you're interested, we'd love to have you learn more about the charity Child Rescue. Go to the menu page on iCollective and click on Child Rescue. Thanks so much.